My name is Betty Krause. Let me guide you on a journey into the world of abstract art where you have total freedom and where the art you create is only limited to your imagination. On my show, I'll introduce you to techniques, tools, and tips to turn your imagination into art. Together, we'll add a little more color into this world. Abstractly yours, Betty Krause. Welcome to Abstractly Yours. I'm Betty Krause. Today I'll be teaching you about composition and showing you different examples and comparing them. Then I'll show you how to create a beautiful abstract landscape on a canvas. Lastly, we'll finish up with the final reveal. We're going to start by talking about composition. I'm going to keep it simple and call the three I most commonly use as cross, pattern, and horizontal. Let's get into more detail. When I begin a painting, I'm thinking about the composition, and as I go through the painting, I start to narrow down what my composition will be. I don't always go into a painting knowing exactly what it's going to look like. So today I want to talk about a few different compositions that I use most commonly, but I also want to talk about within the composition, there's also, I'm looking for balance, maybe there's a focal point, so I'm looking for emphasis or proportion, movement within the entire piece, unity, variety, rhythm, and then repetition and pattern. So let's talk about the three different ones that I tend to use. I'm going to draw them out here for you. So the first one is a cross pattern, and it's just simply a cross somewhere within your artwork, and it could be more to the left, more to the right. It could also be more centered. The next one here is a pattern. A lot of my artwork falls into that because I love fields of flowers and they tend to follow a pattern. And that's kind of an overall pattern covering the entire piece of art. And it could be larger elements and smaller elements within that. And then the last one here is horizontal. And so you've got the artwork in some way is going across the canvas or the paper. So we're looking for something that just crosses over. So I want to show you what some of those look like from the art that I've done. So this first one here falls into the cross pattern, and when you look at it, you can see that I've got some quieter areas in the corners here, which then makes the more busy area creating a cross. So this one tends to be more centered here and going from one end to the other and across the page as well. Now this next one here is more of a pattern. Although I've got a few quiet areas, you can still see that there's pattern happening almost entirely across the entire paper. So if I was to take this one and compare it to the cross, you can see here that there's a lot of similarities, but when you look at the first one here, you can definitely see that it's going from top to bottom and from one side to another, whereas this composition here, it definitely has a lot more happening all over the entire page. So that's kind of the difference between those, although they feel very similar. And the last one is a horizontal, or what we call a landscape. So this is a really good example of a landscape. We've got the sky here and the land being down here, or it could be the water down here. And this one is cut up not entirely right in the center, but more a little offset so that we've got 1/3 down here and 2/3 down here. And today we're going to be creating one of these on a 24 by 20 inch canvas, and I'll show you how I get started with the mark making, and then we're going to finish it and give it this type of look. Before we get started, let me introduce you to some of the tools and the paints we'll be using today. As you know, I love using mark making tools, so I've got a variety of different colored pencils that we're going to be using at the very start of the canvas. So we'll start with these, And then as we build up some layers of paint, I'm going to be using my nail or my skewer today to scratch into the surface. And for brushes, I've got a variety of different brushes here. I've got a larger one, kind of a middle-sized brush here, and then we've got the rigger that I've talked about before. So that's going to come in handy to make finer lines. And then I've got a spatula, something that you probably see in the kitchen more often than in a studio, but I really like using this tool when we get to the last part of this canvas. And I'm going to be showing you exactly how I like to use this. And for the paints today, we're going to be using Nova Color paints. They are a Southern California company. I've been using them for years and I absolutely love their paints. Love the pigmentation and the fluidity of the paints. And for my painting needs, it works so well. So let's go ahead and now get started on our canvas. All right, let's get started on this 20 by 24 canvas. Like always, I like to start with mark making. So I've got my pencil first, and we'll start with that. All right, and switch over. Got a blue colored pencil. And another one. And let's add one more color. I've got a green one here, which just broke, so we'll pass on the green one. But as I've talked about before, I love using the colored pencils just to get started, and it's really nothing that's going to show up on that final layer, but it's a way to just loosen up and get started. Now let's get the paints out, and then we'll start adding some layers. All right, let's get started with putting out some colors. First up, we've got Cadmium Yellow Medium Nova Color paints. We'll put a little bit of this out. And then let's go with some magenta. One of my favorite colors, works excellent with white paint. It's got a really pretty pink color to it. And how about some orange? This one is called Organic Orange. And these are all warm colors that we're going to be using. In the past, I've kind of talked about using warm colors or cool colors and keeping those separate. So we're going to start with warm colors. And we're going to do some Pearl Red as well. And let's add one more color. We're going to go with Indian Yellow. And that's this large one here. You can tell I really love it because I've got the large jar. All right, those are the colors we're going to start with. And for the first part, I'm just going to be using brushes, and we're just going to be putting paint onto our palette. This is an opportunity for us to start building up some texture. So really any color goes, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to start with some yellow. And I always like to mix my colors as I go. We've talked about harmonizing colors in the past where we're taking a little bit of each color and putting them all together. So I'm doing that now. And let's just put down some marks. So as we build up the texture here, I'm going to add a little bit more, and then we can also scratch into the surface, and that's going to create texture for us. We'll cover the sides as well. And I'm going to add some white as well. And for my white, I like to actually use gesso. So this is Nova Colors Gesso. And we're going to just dip the same brush that I've been using into the white. We're just going to give us a lighter color here. And let's go with some Indian Yellow as well. how about I change out my brush, add some variety, so we'll go with this one. And again, I'm just mixing my colors as I go. I think we've got enough on there now that I can take my skewer and scratch into the surface. Where I've got paint built up a bit more, you can really see that there's some texture happening there. Let's continue with some more colors. So in this stage of it, we're just trying to build up a background. As we talked about earlier, I want to create a landscape, but when I create my landscapes, I don't want it to feel very flat. So in order to give it more character and interest, we're going to put a lot of color in the background. Even though we're going to be covering a lot of that, parts of these are going to be peeking through into that final layer. So it's going to look really great, but right now I know it kind of is going to feel a little bit chaotic, but hang with me and let's get this layer put down. I'm going to switch back to my larger one since we're just trying to really cover this canvas entirely with paint. This is going to give me a chance to really spread out the paint much faster. Just using up the last of it here. And I've got some Indian yellow I want to use up as well. And that Indian yellow was actually mixed with all of the other colors, so not quite a true color. All right, and I'm going to scratch into it one more time. This time I'm going to use my nail. All right, so we are all set for now. I'm going to dry this layer and then we're going to introduce some cool colors before we do our final layer. All right, now that we've put down our warm colors and I have dried our canvas, I'm going to go ahead and put out some cool colors. And we're going to start with quinacridone violet. And let's put a little bit of that out. And on this layer, we don't need as much paint. So I'm going to put a smaller amount than I did the first time around. And then I've got blue-green, one of my new favorites. we'll give yellow-green a try here. And let's go with ultramarine blue. And with ultramarine blue, a little bit goes a long ways. And let's go with one more, and that's going to be one of my favorite colors, which is the phthalo turquoise. All right, so let's get some brushes out again. And I'm also going to add white. So let's do that again. And this time I'm going to kind of try to fill in the white areas so that we don't have any gaps where the canvas is showing. This is the ultramarine blue mixed in with a little bit of white. And let's try this, one of my new favorite colors, with just a little bit of white. Now that we've got a little bit down, I'm going to take my skewer again and scratch into the surface. And I'm going to continue. I'm going to grab a different brush now, about this one here. I'm going to wet it a little bit and go with the quinacridone violet with some white added. Just about done here. Just trying to fill in all of the white areas so that that's not going to show up in our final. All right, one more time, and I'll go ahead and grab the nail. This time I'm going to use the head of the nail. Kind of creates a wider scratch mark. All right, so again, this layer, we're just building up color, we're building up texture. None of this is going to show as it is because, as we talked about, we're going to create a landscape. So we're going to come in and we're going to do a final layer over all of this, and then we're going to allow some of these other colors to peek through so that we can see little bits and pieces of it, just to add a lot of interest to our piece. We'll come in with a sky, so we'll go with a lighter blue there, and then something darker down below. So let's go ahead and get this layer dried, and then we can move on to the final layer. All right, so we are back and we have dried this layer. So now we are ready to continue on to the final layer. And the final layer is actually going to be a couple of steps. So we're going to start with some paint, and we're going to thin down the paint with water. And then once we get that first layer on, we're going to stop, we're going to dry it again, and then we're going to add another layer. And that's just going to create more depth to our painting. So we're going to go with a couple of blue colors. We're going to go with Solarium Blue Hue. So let's put some of that out. And then we're also going to go with one more color here, and that's with Payne's Gray. So with Payne's Gray, we're going to be mixing a lot of white because it tends to be a really dark color. So we'll be using both of these colors on the bottom part, which is going to resemble an ocean, and then the top part resembling the sky. And we've got white as well. So I'll put that out. And now this time, instead of using a brush, we're going to use our spatula. And I want to put down some water as well. So I'm going to use my sprayer, and I'm just going to spray the paint that I have put out. So the reason for that is I want to thin out the paint so that we can get this down in a couple of layers. So I'll start by mixing the water in with the paint and adding some white to it and a little bit of that solarium color. Let's see what we get with that. All right, so I've got some here. And so we want to kind of come up with a horizon line. So I'm going to start with going across this way. Might bring that up just a little bit more. Let's mix up some color again. And I'm just doing this very gently with my spatula. I don't want to come up at an angle, because if I come up at an angle, what's going to happen is I'm going to scrape it away too much. So I want to keep the spatula very much parallel to my canvas. So here we've got a little bit of red peeking through, and that's what I'm hoping to achieve in more areas than just that one. So I usually like to come in with a little bit of a darker color right through there, but we'll work the bottom section first and then we'll come back into there. So we're just working the spatula across. And again, not pressing hard because we want some of those colors to peek through. Not everywhere, like here it's pretty solid, up here it's solid, but we're going to have a little bit, I'm going to cover that just a little bit more, but I'll probably do that after we dry this. I'll come back in one more time. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. And so we've got some variation in color here as well. So I've got a little bit darker, I've got some lighter blues here, going back to darker blues. So that adds, again, more interest if we vary the types of blues that we're using here. I'm going to add some more white. I'm not going to worry about the sides for now. I'm going to take care of that at the very end. I'm going to add just a little bit more of our Payne's Gray. And a little bit more white. So I think we've got a good first coat going on here now. I'm going to go ahead and work on the sky. So we're going to be adding a lot of white to the paint we've already got on the palette, and that's going to lighten up this area. And once we're done with that, we'll dry the entire piece, and then we'll continue. Add some more water. Splattered down below. We'll just spread that out. So this blue, this lighter blue, I still think is probably a little too dark, but what we'll do is we're going to come back in with another layer, and I'm going to lighten that even more. And I'm just kind of blending this line now so that it's not really obvious. So So we can do that. We can just blend it out, or you can come in with a darker horizon line. We'll start with this now, and then we'll take a look at it and decide if we want to do a darker line there. So at this point, I think we're ready to let it dry and come back in, and we're going to do the whole process again, but we're going to go, I'd like to go a little bit darker on the bottom part and then go a little bit lighter on the top part. So let's go ahead and dry that and come back to it. All right, so we are back. I have dried this layer and we're ready to continue on. This is our final layer, but we're going to add one more, and I really like the way our reds are peeking through here. However, I'm going to be covering up some of those as we go through with a darker blue color. And then for the top part, I want to lighten that up a little bit, so we're going to use some white there. So let's get back to our Payne's Gray. And I'm not going to use as much white this time, but I am going to put a little bit of that Stellarium blue into it. And let's give that a try. Darker, much darker. Let's see, do we want that dark? I'm kind of liking it. It's got quite a contrast. Let's go with that. So now, as I go through this final layer, we are going to see a little bit of that lighter blue also peeking through. So again, I'm keeping my spatula very low and perpendicular. I'm going to wipe it down a little bit because I've got my water now kind of running down it. And again, that's so that I don't completely cover it, because if I come in at an angle like this and brush across, I'm going to cover the entire layer, and I don't want to do that. So I just keep going back and forth over it, just slowly covering it up. I don't want to cover it up all at once, so I keep going over it, and I'm putting a little bit more pressure each time I go over it so that I can cover a little bit more, but again, not the entire background. think I'm going to need to put out a little bit more color. Let's use up this first. All right, let me put out a little bit more. So we've got Payne's Gray is what I need. That should be enough. And some more water as well. All right, so we're coming towards the end here. Let me step back a bit. And I want to cover up a few of these areas right in here a little bit more. Okay, we've got some of the color peeking through, and I'm going to just go a little bit more. I don't want too much of it showing through. I want, really from a distance, I want you to barely see it, and then when you walk up, I want you to see more of that detail. So this process is a lot of going back and forth until you're happy with the amount of coverage that you have with the blue. Okay, I think that I'm good with that. I'm going to leave it for now. Let's work on the sky, and then we'll look at the two together and then decide if we've got enough blue down here or if we want to cover a little bit more. So I'm going to switch over to my white now. And I'm just using what I had on my spatula, the blue that was already there. And if it's not light enough, we'll add more white. That's a bit lighter. I think I want to add some more white. and some water. Let's give that a try. That's a bit lighter now. So again, I'm skimming over and I'm going to let a little bit of that darker blue show through, and maybe a little bit of those reds, and we've got some greens in here as well. Whoops, I just splattered some white down below. So I'm not going to spread it with this time because I've got too much white on it. So we'll just take it off like that. That's looking good. I've got a lighter color over here, so I'm going to come back over here with some lighter blue. And what I really like is when we did that first layer there and we dried it and we're using a spatula, there's actually some lines through here that kind of mimics a sky. So that's working really well for us. So I'm going to come down here and I'm actually going to blend in the horizon line here. All right, so I'm going to step back a little bit so I can see where I'm at. I can see that I've got a lot more paint on this side than I do on this side. I kind of like this side better, so I might try to pull some of that paint off. I'm going to wipe off my spatula a little bit. I'll just take a little bit off there and then blend it out. All right, so I'm a little too close. My horizon line is a little bit crooked, so let's see if I can straighten that out a bit. I'm going to come back in with some darker blue here. All right, that's looking much better. It's blending better. I'm going to go a little bit more here. Switch back to white or the lighter color, and now I overdid it. Let me scrape some of that off. So again, like we did below, it's going back and forth until you get that blending just right. All right, so I'm going to cover up this a little bit. Let's see how that looks. I think I've got to come in a little darker right there because I brought that down too low. I'm going to wipe this off so I can just get the darker color on here. So a lot of paintings, when you are running into issues like this, it's really not so much a problem. It's more, think of it more in terms of finding a solution or an opportunity to fix something instead of really looking at it as being a really big problem. Because with acrylic paints, we can continue to build up layers until we're really happy with what we have. All right, so I'm liking that much better now. I've got a little bit of white down here that came down. Cover that up. And this bottom section is already drying. So I'm going to thin that out a little bit. So by adding the water and we thinned out the paint, it allowed us to really spread it on much easier with the spatula, and it's also allowing it to dry a lot faster. So let's take a break now, and let me dry this one more time. Let's come back and take a look at it. Right, so we have dried this final layer. So remember, we put 2 layers on our very last one, and I'm really loving the way it looks right now. I love this dark Payne's gray blue that we've got down here mixed in with the lighter blue on the sky. And what I'm really loving is all of the parts that are peeking through. So those earlier layers that we did that seemed chaotic and crazy and didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, I hope now is making a lot more sense because it's peeking through in all of these different places, and it's really giving this piece a lot of interest and variety and texture and depth as well. So I hope that you take the opportunity to give this a try at home. That's all for this episode of Abstractly Yours. Before we go, I want to leave you with this. Staying creative comes in different forms. Take time to experience art by going to galleries, museums, and local art events. Art can be a social experience as well. Take a class, share your art or someone else's with friends and family. I hope that after watching this show, you continue to dive into the colorful world of art. Abstractly yours, Betty Krause.